Alright, I was going to talk about Adalynn being in the NICU. So she was born October 2nd. I had her around 6:15 p.m. and everything was pretty good. It only took me about 9 minutes to push her out, but she did get stuck. Her head came out fine, but her shoulders were stuck, and so I was in the middle of a push, and I didn't hear this part, but my boyfriend told me that the doctor said that he's like, we're going to need more people in here. And I'm glad I didn't hear him say that, because I would have been probably freaking out. And so at that point, I did have the epidural, but I felt pretty much everything down there. Like, I could feel the ring of fire and everything. And so at that point, I felt him reach his hands in, and I guess he grabbed her and pulled her out. And so everything was fine then, and she passed her APGAR score stuff. She was breathing fine, so I got to hold her, and I got to do the skin-to-skin bonding for an hour. And we were moved to our room, and at our room, well, no, before that, they said something about her tongue being bigger, and so they didn't see any issue with it. So they said, I guess she just has a bigger tongue or something like that. And so anyway, in our room, she eats one time, sort of, like barely anything. And then my mom and my two daughters came to visit, and I didn't notice then at the time, but now looking back at the pictures that we had taken of my girls and the baby, she was really red. And one of the nurses that was taking care of me and her came in, and she's like, you might want to hold her up a little bit because she's breathing kind of funny. And so my mom fixed her. Okay. My mom fixed her position she was holding her in. And so, hold on. Kinsley might come over here and say hi. I don't know. Anyway, she fixed her position. And so after that, maybe like 10-15 minutes after that, the nurse was checking her vitals, and she's like, she's breathing pretty fast. I'm just going to get another nurse to have her check, see what she says. And at this point too, my boyfriend was gone. He was eating with his brother. They left the hospital to go eat, and so I was there by myself at this point too. Excuse me. And so they took her to the nursery for observation, which it worked out in a way, because the observation room was like right across the hall from my room. So I was able to go check on her, and the nurse, really nice lady, she said, okay, she's not able to keep her stats above the 90s, like it was steady in the 80s. And so she's like, we're probably going to go ahead and send her down to the NICU. So I was like, oh, okay. So that was very nerve-wracking. So I had only been with her like 2 or 3 hours before they took her away. And so once she got into the NICU, this was the middle of the night, so I was resting and my boyfriend was resting, and the nurses came and they said that they were going to check her for pneumonia. And so, okay, hold on a second. They put a oxygen thing in her nose. They hooked her up to a CPAP machine and stuck an IV in, and they had lots of trouble with an IV. They had to poke her so many times, like at least 4 or 5 times, till they finally got a spot in her arm. So at that point, they were giving her oxygen. They put a feeding tube in as well. And so I wasn't able to breastfeed, which really sucked. So I had to pump, and they would give her formula for whatever she needed, which also sucked because my other two never had any of that. So they were pretty, like, basic. Kinsley's telling her big sister to shh. Anyway, hold on a second. Sorry, I had to stop the video to talk to the older two. I was losing my train of thought anyway. I'll go ahead and tell you what the CPAP. If you don't know, the CPAP machine helps to open up the lungs and the airway, I guess, and it kind of is like the pressure of air that goes into the lungs. So I think she was on an 8, I want to say. So she had that going on. We had to wait a day or two for tests to come back. And so they were testing for pneumonia. They did an echo on her heart because she had a heart murmur and stuff. And they said her heart looked fine. And in the meantime, while that was going on, she got a pneumothorax, which is when one of the air sacs in the lungs bursts and air goes into the chest cavity. It sounds so painful, and I was not there when it happened. I felt terrible, honestly, because I did not visit her as much as I wanted to due to the older two kids and not being able to drive myself to and from the hospital. We didn't live that far away. We lived probably 30 minutes from the hospital. But anyway, so the pneumothorax, they called me because I was at home at the time, and they told me what had happened and that they had to either stick a needle into her chest and pull out the air through x-ray and stuff to see what they're doing. Or if that didn't work, they would have to put a chest tube in her side, which both sound extremely painful. But they were hoping just the needle would get everything. So they asked for my permission over the phone if it was okay to go ahead with the procedure, and I said yes. And so they did it, and they took an x-ray later on, and they're like, well, it looks like almost all the air is out. And what they did next is they put this little, like, it looked like imagine like cutting an egg in half. Like, if you're holding it up this way and you cut it in half, it looks like half an egg. Like, that's the best way I could explain it. They called it a hood, and they put it over her. And okay, so say like this is her head. They put it, oh yeah, and this is her butt. They put it right like in the middle, like right above her butt, over her head. So it was covering half of her body. And what that was supposed to do was it was supposed to get the remainder extra air in her body to disappear. And I don't really know exactly how it works, but they said it works a majority of the time. And it did. It worked very well. And so this all took place within like a 4-day period. And so I wasn't able to hold her, which was so hard. Wasn't able to hold her. All I could do was just touch her little foot or pat her butt or something. And that was a really hard time for me. I cried multiple times a day for probably a week or so. So on day 4 is whenever they did the hood thing. And also between day 4 and day 5, they said that she was jaundice, so they had to put her under lights as well. She had to be under those lights for a day or two. And then day 5, so okay, Adalyn apparently was a very feisty one. She could not keep an IV in. They tried her head. They tried 2 spots on her head. They tried several different spots on her arms, on her foot, stuff like that, and they couldn't get an IV to stay for more than like a day or less. So I got another call from the doctor, which, by the way, the doctors were amazing. They kept me updated. They answered any questions. They were just very supportive, very awesome. But the female doctor called me on. She said that Adalyn had pulled out her IV again somehow, or irritated it to where it went bad, and that they wanted to put an IV through her belly button. There was a specific name for it. I can't remember now that I'm trying to think about it, but they basically put it in through her belly button, and they said there's a risk of infection, clotting, and bleeding. And so, of course, I'm like, okay, that's not good. I'm really nervous about it. But they said that they thought they would do really good. They make it very sterile in the room. Only a couple of people are allowed in there for that very reason. And so I had to give permission again, and I did. And they said it worked good. She had it in there the majority of, like, the rest of the time she was in the NICU, which she stayed down there probably, I want to say 8 days probably. So day 6 of being in the NICU, she was able to take off the oxygen, and she wasn't under her jaundice lights anymore. But a big issue with her was every time we would try to introduce a bottle to bottle feed, she would choke, and it would make her heart rate drop very low, and she'd start being able to breathe. And so another thing, I mentioned the tongue. Her tongue is on the larger side, but it's not like huge, I guess, if that makes sense. And so anytime she would drink, it would like leak out the side of her mouth, and instead of latching with her bottom lip, she would form the seal with her tongue. It sounds weird, but it was really cute as well. So you would have to hold her up at an angle, kind of tilt her to the side while you fed her. And so we had to work several days on doing that with her. And once she was gaining weight, we were able to take the feeding tube out. And once all of that was done, I was able to try and breastfeed again. And she did so good breastfeeding. She didn't leak at all. She only choked a few times. So last day in the NICU, they moved us to the PICU, where the children stay, and that was a good thing because that means she was on the road to success. And I stayed in with her overnight, one night, because it was somewhat mandatory for the parent to room in one night. And so I roomed in with her, and she did really good. She didn't have any incidents where her heart rate dropped when I fed her. And she was able to come home after 13 days of being in the NICU. And it doesn't really sound scary when I try to explain it, but it's terrifying seeing your baby hooked up to all these wires and having to have a needle stuck in their tiny little chest and not being able to be. My biggest thing was not being able to be there for her through all of this. Even thinking about it makes my eyes water. It's just, now that she's here with me all the time, I I just can't imagine how I don't even know how I did it, how I was able to leave her every day, but I had to, being a mom to 2 little ones. So anyway, those are that's my main, I guess, my main story of how it all went. I will say too, I forgot to add in, when she did get diagnosed with pneumonia, she had to stay an additional 7 days because she was supposed to be on the antibiotics for, I want to say, 10 days. So that was a majority of the reason why it took so long to go home as well, because she had to take all those antibiotics. When I was in labor with her, I was actually on antibiotics due to group B strep, so she had some of that as well. But now she's a healthy, chunky, happy baby. She is so fun, so smiley. I'm going to try to get her on video sometime. At the moment, she's asleep. If you see me kind of like bouncing, it's because I'm bouncing her in her little bouncer thing. But, alright, well, thank you for watching. If you have any questions, comment down below. That was my story of my sweet baby in the NICU.